Welcome to a Scotland Then episode. In this episode, I will tell you about some of the stories in the newspapers at the same time as Mary Timney's trial was going on in April 1862. I'll also be giving shout-outs throughout the episode to listeners that Peter and I had the pleasure of meeting at Crimecon in London recently. Speaking of which, there will be another Crimecon in London on the 7th and 8th of June 2025, which Peter and I will also be attending, and tickets are available to purchase now. And there are payment plans available so you can spread out the cost. But don't forget to use the code SCOTTISH at the checkout for an extra discount. I can't tell you how much Peter and I enjoyed Crimecon this year. It was hands down the best Crimecon we have attended so far. The atmosphere was electrifying and exciting. The new venue was just perfect. And there were so many new podcasters there this time to meet and chat to. Just loved it. Okay, so now let's get on with today's Scotland Then from April 1862. The first article that caught my eye was in the Kilmarnock Post on the 12th of April 1862, and it read, "A Kilmarnock lady in trouble." Ooh, I thought, that sounds interesting. What could that be about? Well, I was a bit disappointed. I hadn't realised that newspapers, even back in 1862, would try and sensationalise a not that interesting story and use a grab-you headline. I'll tell you the story anyway. Maybe you'll find it more interesting than me. On the evening of Monday the 7th of April 1862 in Maryhill, a report was lodged at the police office that a silver watch and several articles of jewellery had been stolen from a dressing case in the house of Mr. Alexander. Upon a superintendent visiting the house to look around, and it must have been a well-to-do family for a superintendent to attend, he concluded that the theft must have been carried out by someone acquainted with the house. He then proceeded to start interviewing the staff, where a domestic servant immediately admitted that a friend of hers had been at the house that day and had helped her to clean it. It was then reported that Mr. Anderson, the homeowner, proceeded to Glasgow and, with the help of an interim assistant superintendent, traced the domestic servant's friend and the stolen belongings to a house of ill fame. They also found more stolen items there, which were also returned to their owners. The thief was called Sarah, and she was apprehended and brought in front of a Maryhill magistrate, where she pleaded guilty to the theft and was sentenced to 60 days imprisonment. So there you have it, a Kilmarnock lady in trouble. Was it what you expected the story to be about, or were you disappointed like me? I also came across a miscellaneous section in the Kilmarnock Post, and it was full of jokes. Some went right over my head, and others were just so bad I had to laugh. Like this one. Why is an otter the most peculiar of animals? Because his tail comes out of his head. I told you it was awful. Or this one. Sam, where have you been? We've been swimming, father. We? Who swam with you? Nobody, sir. Well, but you said we've been swimming, didn't you? Yes, father, we've been swimming. Who then did you swim with? We. I swam with the tide, Dad. And that one got an eye roll and a wee smile from me. We turn a bit more sombre now with the next two stories, which I found again in the Kilmarnock Post, both of which were headed Melancholy Accident. One was a railway accident at Dalry Station, which made me wince, and the other was a boating accident near Dunoon. The railway accident involved a guard, Donald Campbell, who, upon the 4:30 p.m. train to Ayr from Glasgow, stopping at Dalry Junction, was trying to uncouple the carriages as they were going separate ways when his foot slipped. This next bit was a bit worrying, as I would have assumed the train was stopped at the time to allow Donald to safely uncouple the carriages. But as it was reported that, upon him slipping, one of the wheels of a carriage passed over his right leg, a little above the ankle, I have to assume that the train was still in fact moving. How else could it have passed over his leg? Anyway, understandably, his leg was frightfully crushed, and his leg was quickly bandaged, and Donald was taken to a local doctor at Dalry. However, the doctor was unable to do anything, and so Donald was transported to Glasgow Infirmary, where sadly his leg had to be amputated. I know health and safety was a bit different back then, but that accident could have easily been prevented. A moving train when trying to uncouple carriages just beggars belief. The second melancholy accident involved three young men, only known as McFarlane, Forrester and Smith, who travelled from Glasgow to Dunoon with the intent of going shooting wild fowl. However, upon arriving at Dunoon, they decided instead to hire a boat, only a 10-foot keel, and began to row towards mid-channel. The weather was relatively mild, with it being reported there was a stiff breeze blowing from the south, but there was somewhat rough seas. Anyway, after rowing for about 2 miles out to sea, the boat began to quickly take on water. In a panic, the three young men began to wave to another small rowing boat they saw not too far away, signalling that they needed help. However, this boat had lost one oar, so while they did their best to make their way quickly to the rapidly sinking boat the three young men were on, it did take them some time. And sadly, by the time this boat reached the sinking boat, Forrester and Smith had drowned. But they were still able to save McFarlane, albeit he was barely holding on to his life. Then, using just the one oar, the men in the small rowboat made their way back to Dunoon as quickly as they could. McFarlane was then taken to the local doctors, and he was later said to be considered out of danger. Not how they imagined their trip to Dunoon to shoot wild fowl would have turned out. Before I go on to tell you about more newspaper articles from 1862, including one titled Death Under Painful Circumstances, I'm first going to give a shout out to everyone we met at Crimecon. There was Lizzie from Loch Fyne, Carrie and Corin from Louisiana, Caroline from Colchester, Freddie from Somerset, Susie from Perth, Nikki from Wakefield, Candice from Pennsylvania, and Candice, Crimecon UK are still not sure if or when they will be going back to Scotland, but they'll be making some announcements soon, I'm told, so we'll just have to wait and see. There was also Peter from Canterbury, Chris and Danny from East Sussex, and Chris and Danny, I hope the torches worked out for the kids, and I didn't end up getting your cold, Danny. Better luck next time. Also Tilly and Emma, and thank you both for the wee insight into what it takes to be a police officer and being a police officer's wife. Really interesting, and I'm looking forward to speaking to you more. And finally, an extra special shout out to Anna from Whitehaven, who told me how you can get the judge's sentencing remarks for cases in England, although sadly not for Scotland, but hopefully one day, as it would be really useful. If I've missed anyone, I'm really sorry, but let me know and I'll give you a shout out in a future episode. But it was really great to meet every one of you, and I appreciate you listening and supporting the podcast so much. It would be great to see you again, and even more listeners if possible, at Crimecon in June. So don't forget to use Scottish at the checkout for a discount on your Crimecon ticket. Speaking of events, Peter and I are hosting our very first podcasting event on the 17th of October between 7 and 9 p.m. at Haylofts in Newcastle. So if you want to know more about podcasting, I've always wanted to have a podcast but don't know where to start, are an existing podcaster looking to join a growing podcasting community, or are a small business or freelancer who can help podcasters on their journey, then why not come along and say hello? There will be drinks and nibbles, lightning talks, and even a tour of the iconic Haylofts. We look forward to seeing you there. Now, back to 1862. Okay, the first one is a silly wee one, but it shocked me. It was from the Scotsman on the 26th of April, 1862, and the headline read, Extraordinary Fish Caught in the Firth. Well, I wondered initially, how extraordinary can it really be? Well, let me tell you. The fish was caught by James Muirhead, a fisherman of Pittenweem, which is a fishing village in Fife, and the fish weighed in at 288 pounds. That's 20 stone, 8 pounds, and 130 kilograms. I mean, holy hell, that is quite extraordinary. Its length was over 6 foot, that's about 1.82 metres. Its breadth was 3 foot 5 inches, that's almost a metre, and its thickness was 12 inches, about 30 centimetres at the middle. That is a pretty big fish, you have to admit, and it is well deserving of its newspaper headline of Extraordinary Fish Caught in the Firth. It's not every day you see that size of fish at the fish and chip shop. So the next story that caught my eye also came from the Kilmarnock Post on the 12th of April 1862, with the headline reading, Death Under Painful Circumstances. While I was reading this story, I did initially find myself smiling, imagining the circumstances described, forgetting that the title had said that there'd been a death and that it had been painful, which obviously was not good. Anyway, the story is about two brothers, Robert and John Miller, who resided in Saltmarket Street in Glasgow, and on the morning of Thursday, the 3rd of April, the pair left their residence and walked 3 miles northwest to Mulgai, pushing a barrow to try and hawk their wares for the day. It would appear that throughout the day the pair had been supping whisky, and so by the evening, when it was time to walk back home, they were pretty drunk. About an hour into their journey back home, the pair stopped and drank some more liquor, upon which John fell to the ground and was completely overcome. So much so he was unable to get up again, despite Robert trying to get him to his feet. And so Robert had no choice but to put John in the barrow and continue on their journey home. However, the barrow was still relatively full, and Robert had a drink too, so John tumbled off the barrow several times before the pair finally made it to Maryhill, still about an hour's walk from their home, where Robert came across a police officer and asked him if he would take charge of his brother. The police officer agreed, and the pair pushed the barrow, with John still on it and tumbling off the barrow several more times, to the local police station. However, when they got there, the officer on duty refused to help Robert and John, saying he would not give them shelter and allow John to be checked over, and he sent them on their way. By this time it was after 11 p.m. John was still completely overcome, and Robert, now sober, was extremely worried about his brother. But he had no choice but to continue on to Glasgow, with his brother on the barrow, again regularly tumbling out onto the street, in the hope of getting help there. It took Robert and John another 3 hours to reach Glasgow, presumably due to all the tumbling out of the barrow. Upon making it to Buchanan Street, John again tumbled out of the barrow, and 2 police officers noticed this and approached to see what was going on. Robert said at this point his brother had been seized with a fit, and so he asked the police officers if they could procure some water from a nearby temperance hotel, which they did, before helping the brothers to the nearest police station, where John was placed upon a sofa by the fire to see if that helped, which it apparently did, and Robert felt reassured enough to go home and get some rest. However, an hour later, when an officer went to check on John, he found him dead. Officers then quickly made their way to Saltmarket Place, where Robert was getting some rest, and they arrested him and took him back to the station. Upon morning arriving, and the Procurator Fiscal finding out about this arrest, he ordered Robert be released immediately. However, this order was not complied with, as the superintendent of the Maryhill police station, where the brothers had first sought help and been turned away, told the officers who had arrested Robert that he had ascertained that the 2 brothers had been seen fighting, and so it could have been due to this that led to John's death. Upon hearing this, the Procurator Fiscal agreed, and Robert was kept in jail until further inquiries could be made. It was upon the post-mortem being carried out on John, which showed that the cause of death had been congestion of the brain, and that there were no marks beyond slight abrasions on him, likely resulting from John having tumbled repeatedly from the barrow, that his now grieving brother Robert was released. So it just shows you never know what's really going on, and you shouldn't just assume. But if I'd been the officer in charge of the Maryhill police station at the time, I possibly would have just assumed that Robert and John were drunk, and maybe sent them on their way too. The newspaper article did go on, however, to call out the Maryhill police officers for not helping the brothers, saying that them turning the brothers away surely resulted in culpable neglect of duty, gross neglect of official duty, and something like a positive act of inhumanity, and they called for an explanation of this. What would you have done? Would you have seen the 2 drunk men and not offered them a place to sleep it off? Do you think the police were negligent in this case? Hindsight is a great thing. The final story today is also from the Kilmarnock Post on the 12th of April 1862, and it read, "Employment of the Queen's Family." I thought that might be quite interesting, as it's something that's still talked about today, who does what in the monarchy. But again, it wasn't quite what I expected. The article was referring to the Isle of Wight residence of Queen Victoria, and how a large portion of the palace grounds were given up to the young princes and princesses, where they were said to pass many hours of their time, with each child having a flower and vegetable garden, greenhouses, hothouses, tool houses, and even a carpenter's shop. The princes and princesses were said to work in these areas with the enthusiasm of an amateur and the zeal of an Anglo-Saxon. It was explained that the children also spent a lot of time in the adjacent building where a kitchen had been fashioned, where the children, in their aprons and cooking jackets, would learn the mysteries of pastry making, cooking vegetables from their own gardens, and preserving and pickling, just like any other farm children would. Although the royal children would not weary themselves like the farm children who gain their bread by the sweat of their brow. It was said that the royal children would then distribute their goods to the poor of the neighbourhood. The Queen was determined that her children should learn everything, including learning to better appreciate the results of their labour in the luxuries surrounding them. And apparently the royal children were never happier than when they were engaging in such activities. The article ended by saying that this is a picture of which the English nation may justly be proud. There is not such another royal family on the face of the earth. So that's just some newspaper stories from April 1862, but there were so many more stories that I just couldn't tell you. If you're interested in finding out more about what happened in the past, the website I use for research is the British Newspaper Archive, and there are apparently over 84,777,000 newspaper pages which date from the 1700s available to read. I pay a subscription because I use it a lot, but there are also over 4 million free-to-view pages covering not just Britain and Ireland, but the Caribbean, India, and more. If finding out more about the past interests you, then I have an affiliate link for you, which you can find in the show notes or at scottishmurders.com. Before we go, I've got one more shout out to give, and it's to Misty, Dawn and Alan, who are both friends and long-time supporters of Scottish Murders. They're based in Denver, Colorado, and they offer a range of massage therapies, from prenatal and neuromuscular to sports massage and reflexology. Misty Dawn specialises in amputees, infant massage, scar tissue therapy, and sports performance. Misty Dawn's sessions are deep and detailed, and be ready for some intense but rewarding therapy. Alan excels in reflexology, sports, and neuromuscular, and Alan creates a healing space for a mental vacation while providing structural maintenance. It's like getting your house renovated while you relax. If this sounds just what you're looking for and you're in Denver, Colorado, or passing through, you can find out more about MDA Massage, including reading their 5-star reviews, by visiting vagaro.com/MD&A Massage. I hope you enjoyed this week's Scotland Then from 1862. A new Scottish Murders episode will be released next week, and this time it won't be such an old case, but from 2014, with the murder happening in Glenrothes and Fife, and the case was a listener request. So until next time, I've been your host, Dawn.
Scottish Murders is a production of Clwrin Ton.